Okay, so my preparation is very, very long, I would say. So this talk I gave today, I started writing it in December. And I probably practiced it more than 40 times, either giving it at a meetup or having done it in front of or using my boyfriend as a slave to listen to my talk and give me feedback. So the more times that you give it, I think the more confident that I become, and also the better that it gets. Because when I first give it, there's nothing funny about it. And if I try to make jokes at the beginning, they're really bad. So they kind of have to come up organically the more times you do that, and then it becomes kind of decorated with a little bit of humor. And I also have to take off vacation days from work because it requires more than just doing it on a couple of weekends. So it is, like a side gig, I guess, just to get it out.
Hey everyone, this is episode number 22 of NADCAST. As it happened last year, I've been part of the ReactNotAConf conference happening in Sofia, and we recorded a live episode of the podcast, and we did the same this year. After each of the talks, we had a short panel with the speaker, and in the end there was a panel with all the speakers. So this is what you're going to hear today. Enjoy.
This was a talk by Mihail on the evolution of React APIs. Just a reminder to the speakers that the thing that we're doing now will be part of a podcast episode. So when I ask questions, don't answer with yes and no, because then the podcast will be really short. So yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. No. So you're talking about evolution. I'm thinking this is a bit of a vague question, but do you think that the evolution may happen in small companies? Because we saw that, for example, Angular came from Google, React came from Facebook. Is it really possible to have evolution in our industry, in some small companies solving small problems?
Well, Vue came from one guy that wrote Vue, so I think like the main thing, like being more philosophical and getting into like the evolutionary part of it. In evolution, selection and mutation are completely independent. So mutation just happens all over the place, sometimes randomly, and then there is this thing called selection, which is just whoever survives, survives, right? So big companies like Microsoft had Atlas back in the day, like a framework that was, everybody predicted is going to be huge. You haven't heard of it, right? In the 2000s, right? So nobody heard of it because it just died, right? It wasn't adopted. And jQuery was developed by some guy, and it still lives on, and we have people today that still prefer jQuery already. So, yeah, evolution can happen anywhere. Is it easier for bigger companies to force evolution? Maybe.
One question I have is like, I'm doing React for a lot of years, you guys as well, and for me, like the hooks and all this seems like a very natural evolution, because when I see them, I see what they're placing, like a couple of steps behind. But I've noticed that for a lot of like new people, they get very confused, because now like the API service point of React is getting a lot bigger, and they're like, okay, should I use A, B, C, or D?
Well, yeah, it's like starting to watch Game of Thrones like from the 8th season, right? So there's all this setup that's there, and if you just tune in and like, who's this guy? Why is this lead doing that or whatever? Like, and it's hard, right? Of course, the service has grown. It's up to a company's culture. So if you're just learning React for fun, do whatever. But if you're trying to have a company that has a specific set of rules and ways and patterns that they use, that's kind of up to you to help your employees and help the people who are working on your project get that specific surface area that you need, right, for your project. And that, like we say that somebody should be T-shaped, right? So you should have broad knowledge about many things and deep knowledge in some things, right? So it's kind of a trade-off.
You mentioned this a little bit. What's your strategy for bringing the new stuff? I'm asking this because right now, for example, we are our applications are quite big, and we don't want to spend time like refactoring stuff. And what we're planning to do is just to write new stuff with Kudos, for example, but just leave the other ones with the rest of the old APIs. Do you have any other strategy for this?
Well, that's kind of the strategy, and that's kind of the backwards compatibility part that I talked about, the stability part that I talked about. Even though we have new things and the new patterns are kind of better in some ways, you don't have to kind of jump the shark and do everything right away, right? So you can basically, new stuff you develop with hooks, and one of the good things is that it's pretty easy to just update to the version that has hooks, right? So you can start using that version, and you can start introducing hooks in your new code, and then if something feels very painful the way it was written, like back in 2015, which is like ancient times in front end. So if something feels painful, then just refactor that painful bit first, and then see how it goes from there. But yeah, I mean, that's the guy with the hard choice to make. Should I write the code or should I refactor?
Why do you think people adopted so easily React hooks? I mean, obviously it's the better API, but immediately after the conference, when Dan Abramov was just announcing the hooks, people were just, I'm just not rewriting everything.
I mean, I guess Facebook is good at advertising, so they kind of sold it pretty well, and that's one thing I didn't like about that. They hyped it so much, and part of it, it's a good API. I also like it a lot, and I think it's a lot. And you can see there are discussions on GitHub, and there are a lot of articles. There's a repository in GitHub called React Future, which is from 2014, 2015, where they actually have like prototypes of kind of semi-hook things and call return pattern, which is not in React. It was, didn't have a chance to mention it because of too much things to talk about, but there's this thing called call return, where a component can return. Which is...
It sounds familiar.
Yes, but this is a good one. So it's an interesting thing, and they're experimenting in the open, and the discussion is there, and there's a lot of thought that went into that API, and that's why I think it's kind of like that's why it's adopted so well.
Like one interesting thing which the React team does is they have this favor of prefacing features with unstable and experimental. And we actually use a similar approach with your project, like, okay, I'm writing these guys in my team, but is it stable and unstable? Do you use a similar approach?
We don't have that good of a development culture, I guess. I mean, it depends. Like, if I'm writing a library, I've noticed that library code is much better than product code in general. Like if you open a library, libraries are like, they deal with all the edge cases, and they're like tuned for performance, and they're easy to understand, or at least the surface level API is. And there's a lot of things that go into making a library. While you want to just show some stuff to the user, you want to just show some stuff to the user, and you bang it out as quickly as possible. So your kind of product code usually looks like shit compared to the library code.
Yeah. So thank you, Michael. It was so fun. Hope to be on a couple of other panels and continue like the thread for like evolution here.
Elizabet Oliveira, an SVG tale.
Okay, so first of all, sometimes I'm doing presentations as well, and usually when you're presenting something, we're kind of comparing to the other speakers. In terms of performance, maybe you're doing this just after a talk or something like this, but you can't just go on stage and freestyle. This is basically killing every other talk after it. Because I think singing and rapping and all kind of stuff should be just forbidden at the stage, because not everyone is able to do it, but yeah. So, yeah. So, I see that most people use it just as icons. They don't really use them for images a lot. What I think is happening, people don't usually do animations, for example. Is there a lack of tools or a lack of knowledge? What's your solution?
I think most of the people, they just don't know about what you can actually do with SVGs. Actually, when I was creating that cassette tape the first time, my idea was, how can I achieve this with HTML and CSS? I thought, okay, how can I split these in different images, like the wheels could be different PNGs. So your mind actually goes for HTML, split in different parts the image, how can you make it responsive? But once you find a scenario where, in that case of the cassette tape, I found that scenario that would be really difficult to create with CSS, and actually you can do it, but then I thought, okay, what if I export as an SVG, and I can actually interact with JavaScript, and I can make the play and the pause a button. So I think until you find this type of scenario, you just don't know about it.
What's a good place for people to actually know what SVG can do? Because there's like all those animations which are like properties and all these like the paths, like something to get off on the metrics. And where is the place where people can learn more about what's possible?
There's actually a lot of good websites where you can read what is possible to do with SVG, but I think that, to start it's easier if you use a tool like Sketch or Illustrator, and you can actually just export. Actually, maybe the code will be a little bit big compared if you were doing from scratch, but you must be a genius to create that code, for instance, for the cassette tape without software like Sketch. So I think you can just start creating like small ideas, and then you export it, and after that you just try to animate.
What's your process of like, you're first going to Sketch, then React, going back to Sketch? How do you work?
One thing that I do is when you use like a plugin like SVGo to like optimize the file, it ends up like removing all the IDs, and then you just look to the SVG file and you don't know what you're looking into. So I don't use this type of, I don't use the SVGo plugin with Sketch. What I actually do, I really save as an SVG file, and then I go to SVGo online, and you can actually change the properties, and I always leave the IDs. By default, Sketch will, if you call one part, let's say the wheels, the Sketch will create like the wheel ID, and then you can actually see when you look to the codes by the IDs, okay, this is the wheel, this is the play. So it's one thing that I always do, to leave the IDs, so I can, then it's much easier to split the code.
That's smart. I actually had those problems of, okay, what's that about the SVG?
That's really interesting, because I actually now realize that the SVG is somehow like a bridge between the designer and the developer. Do you see that you need some kind of because if you're a designer, for sure you could design the SVG in Sketch, for example. But then after that, in order to use it, you actually have to understand HTML, for example. In order to animate it, you probably have to know JavaScript. JavaScript. And I saw that you are a designer/developer. Does that mean that in order to use SVG, for example, you have to have some knowledge about some design stuff and then some programming? It sounds a bit complicated.
Yes, but I think if you start like researching, you will end up like learning by yourself. Actually, I don't think you need to know too much, but once you start exporting and if you leave there the IDs, you can start realizing, hey, what is this G? And if you search about it, this is the group, or this is a path, or this is a circle, and you start just understanding how the way SVG is, the XML is done. It's very similar with HTML, and I think it's, as a designer, easy to use.
I don't have any more questions. I just want to go and check the library because I have a lot of 404 pages which will need some happy faces.
Or sad. Okay.
Let's thank you, Elizabeth.
Ilona Demidenko, conversational sign-up with chatbox-like experience with React and Redux.
Okay, we managed to mirror the screen. So I saw that you showed us a picture of the layout first. Then you showed us a diagram with the state machine, and then you do the implementation. Is this the way of how you usually develop apps? Like you start with the design somehow, they go to the app flow, and then continue with the implementation.
Actually, I prefer to divide the big problem into small steps.
Okay.
Yes, and as I mentioned before, so my technical tasks at the moment, it was not only about the front end, it was also about the user experience. Yes, and about the different ways how it could be implemented. And usually I'm doing it like that. And yes, so I try just to understand what approach I'm going to use for that, understand, I do the state machine. And then, of course, during this implementation, I just add some steps, so I figure out so how it will be work, or how it will be better to present. Yes, during this implementation, I, of course, add some things to improve the design and implementation in general. So it was like that.
I really like that it's like the way you design that is very like reusable, and I can see that you might use it in some other situation. Have you thought about like using this exact like flow for other places in the applications you're working on?
Actually, yes, it would be, but so now current, so at work we don't do that. But the idea, so actually in team lead and the dev team they really like it. Maybe in the future we are going to do that. For my side project, so I also keep in mind that I can do that, but it depends on the project, of course.
So, did you actually were doing like A/B testing from your like the old flow to the new flow?
No. So it was like that for the testing task. So I just wanted to try to implement that idea. So because it's not going to the production in general. So and yes, I like it to do, and I also like it that other people like it to see this result.
A little bit about Redux. Do you remember how you started actually writing the application? Like, did you start from the components or did you start from the actions? Because for myself, for example, I prefer to start from the sketching the actions in my app, then continue with the reducer, for example. But some of my colleagues, they prefer to do the UI first and then continue with the logic to wire and stuff. So what was your approach to building that?
Actually, I also prefer start with example working with React and Redux. I also prefer to start with the actions. So I'm going to dispatch to the reducer. But as I remember, so the first things actually I did, I implemented the first trigger. It was delay. I I mean, just to see that message actually just changes, but it was not about the action, so the next action is actually that it changed to the next state, so to the next message. Yes, most like that.
And the topic about state machines, I have some history with it, and now I think that almost everything in the front-end development could be actually represented in the state machine. Do you use this concept about state machines in your daily job outside of this, for example? Because every time when you have to deal with some kind of state, you're basically building a state machine.
Actually, yes, I can say that. I also apply this approach at work. So because we are working with a huge form, and the form consists of different questions, different question pages. So that's why it's very nice. So depending on the user answer, so to be going to the different kind of the pages of the questions.
You have to explain this to your colleagues, like the concept about state machines. Are they adopting the idea of using the state machine? Sorry. Here's where my question is coming from. When I share this idea with my colleagues that we're actually building state machines every time, we have to use a tool for this because there are tools for state machines. You don't have to implement it every time. There are tools where you can just describe your states, and there's some API for switching from one state to another. And they weren't really keen to that kind of approach. So did you try to kind of bring this knowledge to your colleagues?
The thing is actually all decisions we take. So at work, we are doing that together. So someone could just offer this, have this solution, but then it's always discussed. I mean, in the team. So and this they also thought it's a nice idea to try it and to apply for the project because of the specific of our project. I would like to say we're working on.
Yeah. Okay.
Anyway, one thing we would like to incorporate into the format is if anybody from the audience actually have a question, you can also raise your hand and we would ask it for you. Actually, you will sort of ask the microphone. Any questions? I know Andrew had one. You shy?
I found it really interesting. I never thought about this before. I was just wondering if you had need to set a password in this flow, like it is like a sign up. Did you send an email and then the password is generated, or you think you could also have in the flow an input just to set the password for the user?
I guess I also can use it the same flow and just create a new state that will also with the input password. So also add some validation for that. So to develop this.
Really cool.
Questions anymore?
Thank you very much for the presentation. It's really interesting. And in continuation with what Elizabeth said about the password, don't you think that from a security perspective, maybe it really depends on in what product you're going to incorporate it? Because maybe for some products it will be okay to do it in the flow, but for other passwords it will be, for other products, I'm sorry, it will be really better if you do it via email.
Yeah, maybe it depends on the product completely. I can agree. So it was like the example of doing. We are not doing this at work. I mean, this chatbot conversational experience approach, but in general, it could be also done and used.
What was the reasoning behind going with Redux and not just using React state? That's the state of a React component.
So actually, I'm a React developer, I would like to say, and also applied for the position where the library we're using for the project also React and Redux. So I thought it will be nice to use, the same tech stack and do this testing task with React and Redux.
So have you thought about how you're going to test that with automated tests? Would you just do full feature test, like browser clicking around, I'm going to just test the components or the reader state.
So actually I don't think about that because as you see we have only React and Redux, so we don't have any asynchronous actions, so that's why I don't know, it really depends on what we are going to do with it, and if you need of course to cover the integration with test, yeah, that's what I see.
Yeah, so let's take to one of the talk.
David Kopal, write better React with ReasonML.
Yeah, that was fun.
So, let's say that I went to a conference. There was a talk about Reason, and I liked it. So I had this big JavaScript app, which is really complex. We call it legacy because every time we write something, like a minute later, it's legacy. How am I supposed to migrate my app to Reason? Are there any tools, or should I do it just like on a component base? Logic? I don't know.
I think it also depends how the app is actually baked, but I think the best approach is the same approach that actually Facebook use in their own development. They introduce ReasonML into your React JavaScript application, like component by component. They have Messenger app, all Messenger app on Facebook. It's built in 80% in Reason React. And they use this incremental approach. They start with components, and they start with 0%, and now they are almost 80%. So I think this is the way how to do it. Once you find, I presume you have developers who are excited about new technology. So then here's the new technology. Take a look at it. We will try a couple of components. If you hate it, we will remove it and continue with the JavaScript.
Okay, but how is this working with our building steps? Because, for example, we have now Webpack, and we have Babel, and now if I want to introduce Reason, how is this working? Is it actually possible to use Webpack with the build tool of Reason?
Yeah, of course it is, because actually the application I showed you, it uses Webpack, and like all Reason, you just add a dependency called BS platform, and then which is basically Reason, and then you add like Reason React library, and it's npm package, so it's like no difference basically for you. The result is JavaScript. So when you say this application, and you have your build started, it will automatically compile to JavaScript. So for browser, it's like JavaScript. Browser really don't care if it's Reason or not because it's consuming the JavaScript.
So it's basically just adding another folder for the .re files, which is this is done by base platform, so it's automatic. So you don't need to add you have like package.json, and then you have bs.config, which is like, I don't know, 11 lines, so it's like really not complicated, it's not TypeScript config. And so you just add it, and you will just say, for example, which version of syntax you want to use, if you want to compile to the same folder or to a different folder. So it's like really simple to configure that. Okay, sounds cool.
It is.
Yeah. Can you, for example, one other alternative, like we have on one side which is TypeScript, JavaScript, and Flow, which are just normal JavaScript. And I'm noticing this trend of having languages like Reason, and the other one is like Elm, which is a lot more opinionated in my opinion. But is Reason easier to integrate than Elm in an existing project because Elm is a bit more take it or leave it?
Yeah, honestly, I never use like Elm, but I like seeing some talks. But I think, as I showed you, the great thing about like Reason and Reason React is built. It's basically connecting React, your favorite framework, with Reason. So it's like a very smart step from Facebook, right? Because if you want to make it popular, do this. So I think Elm is a great language, and you can build a lot of interesting stuff with it. And I really can't say like the difference because I never done that. But for these arguments, I will go for a reason because, I mean, yeah, we are on the React conference, so I guess most of you develop with React. So for you, it's much simpler, much like you don't need to learn so many things to get into this. And the principles are pretty similar. So if you've been programming in Elm, like so many principles are same in Reason. So you can just start moving from Elm to Reason.
Yeah.
No, but I was recorded.
What's the cooling support for ReasonML? Because like it's an awesome type, it has an awesome type system, and if you have like an awesome type, that means like that your tooling should be awesome.
Yeah, that was true at the beginning. Really, when you want to, for example, as I mentioned, you can use all the npm JavaScript packages, but the issue is those packages are not typed. So at the beginning, like I know at the beginning, like 1 year ago, more than a year ago, you need to really write manually types for those components and functions. With the library, you have a function, you need to write binding, you need to import, I don't know, some function from Lodash, I don't know, and you said it takes 2 arguments, one of them is string, one of them is function, and it returns something. So it was kind of complicated. But now this is getting more and more easier because you have a library like gentype, and it basically takes your TypeScript types or flow types and convert it to reason types. It also converts your reason types to TypeScript and flow types. And moreover, it also takes your JavaScript React components and convert it to reason React components. So basically this is getting more and more easier because you have these tools which will generate it for you. So really it's getting more. If I was there a year ago, I will tell you, yeah, these bindings, they are more complicated, but now it's really getting more and more easier.
And Facebook are developing Reason, right? I know that React community is pretty active. I mean, there are people outside of Facebook which are contributing to the core, and there are a bunch of packages related to React and everything else. Is this happening with Reason now? I mean, how big is the community?
No, I heard there's no team at Facebook. It's just you are doing Reason. I think they are doing it in a smart way. They basically want to build community, and community contributing to this. It's I think it's a bit different approach with React. And React was just, okay, we are Facebook, here's React. But now it's just here's Reason. We think it's good, but we don't want to build everything by ourselves. So here, so let's create a community, and it's really, I think, working. There's a Discord channel with a lot of people from community. I was a month ago out at the conference, ReactNotAConf in Vienna, and there were really many people contributing to this. So I think it's a good approach because now I think eventually the community will be that important that they will keep the framework alive by itself. So I think it's more important because if you have a community, you cannot cancel the whole community. Yeah. So.
What would you say are the weakest points of ReasonML? What you want to personally get better, more improved in the language, except that being more used outside?
What would we improve?
You improve, if you have the opportunity to, I'm seeing all the issues. What issues should I fix magically right now?
Yeah, I think, when the Reason was created, it was okay. We have OCaml, and then here's JavaScript syntax. So here JavaScript developers will Reason because it looks like JavaScript. But then there's now at the Reason conference, I've seen that there are people who do OCaml and who basically learn Reason, and they are moving back to OCaml. So they are JavaScript people using Reason and OCaml people using Reason. So I think both these groups want the different changes. But for me, I now use it primarily as a JavaScript developer. So for me, for example, as I showed you the compiled code, it looked nice. But for example, if you have variants, as I showed you, and if they are compiled, they are the compilation result is not that nicely readable. They are actually, it's understandable, but they are just some noise. So if you really, I think for Reason it would be great if they could work about this compilation, that if you compile Reason to JavaScript, that it's even more readable. So I would improve that, because I think that's like, because if you have a project and you compile Reason to JavaScript and it's like, looks like JavaScript, well, like you can use it because it was a problem, because everybody can read it. So yeah, but for me it would be like this. I don't have like major, I don't want major improvements.
Is it mean that I could just like hide in the corner, write Reason, just compile it and commit on JavaScript?
You definitely need to put it in production and don't tip to anyone and just push it to master.
And my colleagues think that I'm really smart because I'm writing this JavaScript.
Or you're committing obfuscated code.
Yeah, that's the other option. Let's talk a little bit about the strict typing. We recently had a problem with our company because I don't know about the others, but we don't use Flow, we don't use TypeScript, so we don't have strictly typed writing in our code base. And right now, our product is shifting a little bit, so our types are changing, and our types are defined just on convention. Like we decided, here is the folder, there's some kind of a factory function for creating a JavaScript object, which is hard. But as you know, in JavaScript, it's really easy just to add something, like a small property to something and just use the same type. But then we spent like maybe a sprint just refactoring our code base just because we don't have types, and we refactored a bunch of places where we're just slightly changing one object to something else, and it wasn't really clear. And I was wondering, is it much easier when you start with Reason to just start in the very beginning with the types and you go from there, basically?
Yeah, that's a great question. Actually, yeah, I'm doing that like this. It's like easier to define your types, because if you, the types. The good thing about types is that it forces you to think about your application. So if you think about those types, you write them down, and it's exactly as you said. If you write the types first, it'll be easier for you, because now you will know values you can get like in the part of application. If you know you have 4 possibilities, you write type, and you don't need to deal with it anymore. So this is the way to go for me, starting the types.
Because you kind of define the domain of your app, right? It's
Exactly.
Okay, and how did you start exploring Reason? Like, what was did you just watch a talk and was thinking, oh yeah, this is awesome?
No, it was actually really coincidence. It was in my old job. I was just, there was some guy and he had some great open source library, and he said that he wants to rewrite the documentation, and he said he wanted to do it with Reason. And I like, what's Reason? Like, what is that? And then I just Google it, try to read about that, and it was absolutely coincidence. It was just coincidence,
Yeah, I saw some big names in JavaScript communities just like they were blown away by Reason. They were saying like, this should be new.
What are other big companies except Facebook where they have like success stories with Reason? Like, what are like prominent like these applications written by Reason?
So if you check Reason sites, there are logos of companies that are using Reason, but the problem is if you are really not like open source company, they will show you like the actual code. But as I mentioned a month ago, I was at a Reason Con in Vienna, and the title was On the Road on Production. So basically all the talks were about applications in production, and they were like really awesome. For example, there was, I hope I'm now correct, there was like Icelandic company that it was an agency. They, for example, built a thing for Reason for Sotheby's, which is the largest auction house in London, and it was all in Reason. And they said, okay, we have 20 Reason ML developers. And there was also an interesting application. It was some German company that it was built for trains. So if you're like managing trains, and it's really like dangerous like stuff because you don't want them to crash to each other. So they were like really happy that because they also decided, there were many examples, they said, okay, Reason is pretty safe language, we can rely on it. So it is made smarter to build these applications which are like, you really want to be safe when you are dealing with these kind of situations.
Yeah, to be honest, I never read something about Reason before your talk, and because Reason is is ending on ML, I was thinking that this must be something, probably something like XML or something, I don't know. But it's learning, that was the other thing. But it's more about just describing like UI or stuff, but I see that there's some features which are purely about logic. And now I'm thinking when you're writing such components using ReasonML, you have to test them, right? Is there any additional feature of Reason which is helping to test easier? Or is just like the way of how you test React and it's the same?
Okay, so maybe just one clarification. This was Reason React. It was not like ReasonML. ReasonML is like language as JavaScript. So you can build, you can do backend stuff with Reason. So I just show you like Reason React. It's just library to Reason, but it doesn't matter. ML means meta language. It's not like machine learning. When I published this course, there were people discussing machine learning in the discussion, and I was like, so there may be a mistake. I should say meta language. That ML stands for meta language, not for machine learning. And about your question for testing, you can use Jest or I think Test Renderer has also bindings, so you can just, they are done, so you just install BS Jest and you can test all your Jest components. You can do snapshot tests, you can do anything you can.
For my final question, of course, might have more questions. Is like one thing I like about like learning other languages is they change the way I'm thinking and I'm writing the languages I get paid for to write. So what things that writing ReasonML, how do you see some changes in the way you write JavaScript or other languages you're interacting with, the way you're approaching problem? Does ReasonML changes that in a way for you?
So you mean that basically when I'm writing JavaScript app in the boot job and then I building something with ReasonML. Yeah, you start the hates like TypeScript, because I know if you are dealing with TypeScript, I have like so many messages, like type mistakes is difficult to debug. And I mean, yeah, of course, Reason has a very nice messages, but sometimes they're also a little bit messed up, but it's like easier to find the mistake with TypeScript. I really got much more frustrated with it when you can do Reason where it's much more smoother, it's built in. So that's basically this, but that's what you asked. But yeah, for me, I was always like functional programming in JavaScript. I use Lambda, I use Recompose with VGC, which is before the hooks. So I was really excited. I think if you are really excited about functional programming in JavaScript, and then you move to Reason, it's just a step you need, because in JavaScript everything is like, it's not like supernatural, because you don't have currying out of the box, you need to use Lambda, Lodash, you piping you don't have. So if you just move to Reason, you will get all these features, and it's great.
Yeah, that makes sense. I remember having similar feelings with other languages. I won't say why.
I don't have one question, but I wanted to ask the people, do you have any questions? Come on, Reason is cool. Come on, ask.
Yeah, let's thank.
Yeah, let's thank David.
Radо Stanкov, how not to hate your wife when dealing with forms.
Okay. Let's see.
Okay, now I'm on the spot, right?
Yes.
I'm feeling the burn here.
So, I want to say a few good words about Formic. We are using Formic.
Yeah, it's amazing. It's really great. Like again,
it's a good library as well.
It's like Picard.
Okay. So let's go backwards. Let's start from the from final form. What was the learning curve, and is it a vendor locking library? I mean, if you're using it, can you switch to another library easily, or it's
like the way I showed you, like we are actually in one application we're using something built our own, like a state machine built ourselves. On another application we're using Formic, but we are having the same form interface. Like the whole goal of having this form abstraction is to guard us from the implementation detail. Like if, for example, tomorrow I wake up on the other side of the debate and decide that, okay, maybe I should do forming, which is great library. How many slides do I need to change? How much work I have to change to make it work? It's not much. I just need to massage a bit that area.
Okay.
Have you heard of JSON schema forms?
Yeah, but the thing about it, the designers haven't. Like the thing about this type of like form, it's a bit more declarative, but you can also use it the way you use React. You can actually handle it in a nice way. Like with the JSON schema, you're always locked in. And in this thing, I can always do some hacks. A bit more hacky. And build it like step by step. And I don't want the vendor locking.
And at which point you realize that you need help? Like,
what kind of help we are talking about here?
So I'm talking about the moment where you realize that handling forms on your own, maybe it's not really like the best idea because you have a lot of code to maintain and it's...
Like the moment I realized that was that actually I didn't realize that. This was realized by a team member when they tried to add something there. And they, for example, like we had this situation once where we needed to know if a field was touched. Like if somebody has changed that field or this field was like focused once. And we didn't have this in our form. We didn't think about it in our form. It was built very organically. Also like the core form we're still using in our application is still uncontrolled inputs. And this makes a lot of like complex decisions. And that's when I realized, okay, maybe like I want something battle tested, somewhere I can have plugins and something a bit more standardized.
So, have you heard about JSON schema forms?
Yeah, like 2 minutes, no, 1 minute and 17 seconds ago.
Okay. I saw that you use hooks, so is that just for the slides or are you actually using that in production now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm using them for like a lot of like newish things and they're really good at building abstractions. Like, for example, the use memo thing I showed you, I can actually build use unique ID and just pass, okay, this is the name, this is like setter and this is like the thing, and I can build abstractions on top of it. So it's really good for building abstractions. And the other things, building hooks, they're really good at for like grouping stuff together. Like if we had to use a class and it has like, this component has like 2 responsibilities, they get all meshed up with like our component did mount has like two function calls, and your code starts to look like something. I would switch to Bulgarian to Dobsku Dialo if you have to like put it on different colors. But again, hooks cannot solve every problem. Like for example, the context makes sense to be like that. I wouldn't use hooks to have my fields because they're rendering React components and they're accepting like React components. So it's mixed of all of those things. Like you want your code to be guessable, so the person who uses it guesses what the things do, and be readable and concise and fast and reliable and testable. Sorry.
You're wacky people using hooks in production. So you mentioned abstractions a couple of times. How you find the balance? Because I know that we programmers, we love to create abstractions. You create a builder, you create abstract builder, then you extend the builder to something else, then you add a bunch of other stuff. And in general, building abstractions is probably the most fun in programming because you feel this power of creating something, right? So how you find the balance where you basically have to stop with your abstraction and maybe search for another solution?
You rely on your teammates to tell you on the pull request, I cannot understand that, that's too complicated, and stuff like that. That's one of the things you can do. But the more serious thing, when you think about abstraction, the abstraction solves a problem. And when you need to solve a problem, you have to think, okay, how can they solve the problem with the least amount of work, because we are lazy, and how can this be changeable easy? Like if I have to go like 5 levels, like this happens a lot. Like we build abstraction, then we realize that 2 of the abstraction levels don't make sense, then we collapse them. And that's like the constant balance. And that's part of like our lives. But what we should like have is not that we should guard ourselves of building, like in my opinion, too many abstractions, but we should be open to reversing them and seeing, okay, I have 5 levels of indirection here. Maybe I should like collapse them a bit.
How you validate this process? I mean, like, for example, in Product Hunt, when you think that your PR is amazing and this abstraction is really awesome.
You open mind. Like, if it's amazing only for you, that doesn't make it amazing. Like, if something is useful, if other people find it useful, like for me, I might see this is nice, but if it's confusing and if people don't use it very well, or if I have not named it correctly, like that's how you just go with an open mind. Like you had the joy of building the abstraction. It's also the joy of like removing it and destroying it later. So just have joy 2 times.
Yeah, exactly.
Just an attitude.
Yeah. So here's the trick about the happy programmer. You built an abstraction, a really complex one, and then you just destroy it, and it's much fun.
So I noticed you use a pattern where you attach a component as a kind of like form dot mutation. That's an interesting pattern. Have you noticed any drawbacks to this?
The way I call this is component as package pattern, like a namespace pattern. Like as everything, it has its places. So this pattern works really well if you are using something like a library, like you're building your own library for the components which are used in a lot of places. The problem with these patterns arises that if you attach everything, too many components to a single, like a namespace, that means you are loading all those components when you need them. So you have a problem with code splitting and reducing your bundle. Like for example, if I say my system has this user object, and I create this namespace users, and I can do users.cart, users.list, user.avatar, and I have like 20 of those. Those all get loaded in every single page, and I don't want that because they're not used. You want to use as much usable code as possible. That's the reason, for example, the way we like handling like the form components, they're like 4 or 5, and pretty much all the forms need a form, all the forms need fields, and also it's a really good pattern to have like a container with children style things. Like let's say you have a grid component, and this grid component you need the grid.container, which is like the container, and then you need component that is a row or a column, so you just use those because you have like parent-child relationship between those components.
So kind of a leading question, like at the end you talked that you use GraphQL and Apollo, so is there going to be a half a day tomorrow?
No, we actually decided not to do that. Like originally, originally the idea of the conference was to have like a half a day GraphQL, half a day tomorrow, but we didn't have the physical bandwidth to actually finish the whole organization to it. And also it was too confusing to people. I was a bit scared that some people would not come today and think it's tomorrow, and a lot of people won't know it's tomorrow and come today. And then we had like this whole, and then we had to like talk with our partners, and we just told them about this day. And now if we make the second day, and it's too much like work, and it's like, again, it's a very simple to the way I do my talk. Like I built 2 abstractions, and I just remove one of those, and I have like something a bit more clear.
Sorry for the question then.
No, it's a good question.
Yeah, let's thank Rado about the talk.
Как се случва това, бе?
Slobodan Stojanović, serverless, a backend thing that gives superpowers to front-end developers.
So, because I'm the first one asking a question, I'll actually win the... Right. I'm kidding, I'll give it a
That's fine. Come on. You can share it. It's not auto-scaling, but yeah.
By the way, the funny thing is last year, Krasi actually was just got his book released on the conference. So 2 years in a row we have books here. Yay for me!
Okay, so my first question is, where is the Claudia name coming from?
From the cloud. I have no idea.
Is
just the name. No, maybe someone's girlfriend. But I think that's
Okay. So I actually tried serverless recently, and I noticed that there's some mind shift that people should do. Do you see people having problems with this? Because if you build servers using expressions, for example, this is quite different.
Yeah, of course, there's a learning curve. You need to learn a lot of new services and things like that. So we try to build Cloudia in a way that helps you to start with serverless and to learn basic things easily, and then continue learning more complex things. Can you still hear me? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, there's a lot of new things that you need to learn, and it takes some time. Feel free to message me if you have some issues with serverless. I'll try to help. But yeah, after some time, when you learn all those new services, everything is much easier and faster.
I'm saying that because that was my experience. I spent quite a lot of years writing PHP, where you have something like this, right? You have just some code, you throw it on the server, you don't care about the server, there's some attached properly with the PHP module. So I never thought about how to set up the server. And then when I jumped to the JavaScript Lent, I had to build my own server. I literally run the server. I say, here's the server listening to this port, here are the requests and everything. And then now I'm coming back again to the same thing. So when I started writing functions, I was thinking, well, this is like it's awesome.
I guess now you can use PHP on serverless.
Yeah.
But the thing is, yeah, I did the same thing at some point with PHP and everything, and at some point it happened to me that I was on my way somewhere, I think to Niche, to first something conference or something like that, and then someone hacked our server because the setup was really bad and things like that. The thing with Lambda function is that your code is stateless, so it's really hard to hack something that exists for 100 milliseconds, and yeah. So there's a lot of benefits of this over doing just PHP on the shared hosting or something like that.
I'm also a recovering PHP developer.
You want to help?
No. We can talk later. On the after party. Yeah. There will be a lot of working. Where wouldn't you suggest using serverless? What are the use cases where you would say, yeah, that's not a use case for serverless?
So that's a great question. For us, it's basically serverless first approach. We try to see our new feature or something like that, and to analyze if we can use it with serverless. Then we do serverless. If we need a lot of time and hacks to make it work with AWS Lambda and things like that, we just fall back to containers or VPS and things like that. I didn't talk about the limitations of serverless in my talk here because I had a long list of limitations 2 years ago, and they basically fixed all these things. It was yeah, they're just updating the things really fast. So it was, compliance things. They have compliance. They have SLA now. They have longer function execution. They have many other things that were pain points of serverless. So I can tell you some things that are hard now, but I'm pretty sure in a few months it will not be hard at all because they will fix that. The great thing with serverless is if you go there and misuse something and do some crazy things, at some point a lot of users will continue doing the same thing if you blog about that, and at some point AWS will just make that a good practice. So it's we are affecting the platform in some way.
Yeah, Twitter complaining on Twitter to your developer.
It's literally Twitter during development.
A lot of friends who actually started on serverless are saying that the biggest problem they see is they have too many repos. And can you tell?
Yeah, we basically use monorepo for everything. So our vacation tracker application is now one YAML file that explains our infrastructure and everything. Don't really want to show you that right now. You saw that big diagram. It's generating automatically all those services. It's smart enough to realize which one should be updated on each deployment and things like that. It has rollbacks and things like that. So right now our application is basically one repository.
So basically when you're deploying your application, it's always, every service is on like master. Like when you say, okay, I deploy it.
Basically, we have some main application and then sub-applications that are subsets in different YAML files with different functions. And you just push deploy, and then CI will run tests and figure out which services are changed and deploy just them. That's it. You can get like blue-green deployments and things like that out of the box. You just need to write like pipelines in that YAML file, and then you can release, let's say, 10% of your app for 10 minutes and things like that. So they're working on fixing these things for pain points.
So the serverless provider that I used, they didn't have a tool for running my functions locally. So I did my own tool just so I'm able to actually execute my thing locally. So how is this with Amazon?
They have some things now, but the thing is that it's easy to run functions locally. I can run my function as any other Node.js function because it's just a Node.js function, but it's really hard to simulate all those things that they spin up for you locally. They have simulations of some of the things, but what we do, we basically use hexagonal architecture to split our code in like smaller pieces that can be locally tested with in isolation of everything else, and we have unit and integration tests, and we basically use that to check our services locally. Sorry, one more thing. The great thing with serverless is that we have one environment per each developer and QA person, because it's not costing us anything. It's like one command to deploy another another environment, and they can do whatever they want.
So I was trying to find something bad about serverless.
But
so this could be one of the things at least in my experience. Because I guess if you have a really complex function doing a lot of stuff, and you use something from the infrastructure of Amazon, you can't fully replicate this locally, right?
So yeah, what we do there is we run the function locally and connect to cloud services. Most of the time you do that anyway. With for example, when you connect Stripe or something like that, you don't run Stripe locally and things like that. So yeah.
Yeah, that will be really interesting to run. Okay.
But it's not perfect. Serverless is definitely not perfect. It's still like evolving. Sometimes you'll see a lot of things that are not documented well and things like that. But community is growing and people are willing to help. So as anything else, it's just evolving. That's it.
Okay.
That's it.
Any questions from the audience, by the way?
The key fact is the vendor locking.
Oh yeah, that's a good question. So I don't think. So I have a big article related to vendor lock-in. If you go to my Twitter, you'll see that article, and it has like a catchy title. But basically, vendor lock-in is switching cost. If you want to switch from Node.js to like PHP, I don't know why, but let's say you want to do that, it's like even harder than switching from AWS to Microsoft. And for our application, the biggest vendor lock-in is using Slack, but that's the vendor lock-in that we choose to use. I never had any difficulties with AWS, and the main pain point for like that cloud vendor lock-in thing is that cloud vendor will increase the prices and things like that, and they basically never increased the prices in the last 10 years. They lowered the prices like 15 times so far, and they can do that once, and that's it. They would be finished. So I wouldn't. You still need good architecture, but with hexagonal architecture and things like that, I think we can migrate our application to other cloud vendor in less than 2 months, and our infrastructure costs 14 cents, so I'm willing to risk that. So.
And also, like there's like company like Zeit, which are like trying to abstract different cloud providers, so you use them, and they're like a proxy to you. So there will be companies that can do that.
Of course, but I would love to, everyone is talking about vendor lock-in in the cloud, but there's no really big examples of someone that really did that for some special reason. Maybe sometimes people use different technologies that were not ready at that moment and things like that. For example, you remember that Facebook complained about HTML5 in 2013 or something like that. but now they use React Native, but still JavaScript application. They came back.
Other questions?
Oh, do you want the book? Okay.
It doesn't read much.
That's true.
Yeah, I was going to end the panel anyway because I guess we have to go with the next speaker. So let's thank you.
Thank you.
Monica Lent, building resilient front-end architecture.
Okay, actually, Krassi asked me a question, so I'll ask. So Krassi on my talk asked me when you shouldn't create an abstraction. You actually answered that, but I'm going to ask the reverse. When you should create an abstraction?
That's a really good question. I'm not even sure if there's a universal answer to that question, to be honest. I think the big thing to consider is really similar to what you said, is are other people going to understand this and benefit from it? Because I think oftentimes people love and fall in love with their own abstractions, and when you give those abstractions to somebody else, sometimes they are less passionate about your abstractions. And so I think it's really important to think, okay, is it really the case that this underlying library is too complex? Or is it the case that I just love to make my own kind of distinction there? So I think it comes down to the human element, because this is what the consumers of our code really are.
Actually, Rado took my question. But so I'm wondering something. You know, if you're a doctor and if you hit the wall with your foot, you're not freaking out thinking, oh, I'm going to die now. Because the doctor is able to judge himself properly, right? And I'm wondering, all this stuff that you mentioned now, they were really awesome, but did you actually fall sometimes in all these pitfalls? What yourself? And more importantly, are you able to actually go out of this situation? Like, for example, you see this really nice abstraction and you think, oh, I should build this, and then you jump and build it. Or you just pause and you remember your rules and then you apply them to yours.
Yeah, I mean, I can definitely say that this entire talk is based on making a lot of mistakes. So it's not just hypothetical. These are all techniques that we are using in the larger production applications that we are working on. So it all comes down to saying, I have done this. I cost a lot of time and energy from myself, from my colleagues. There are even mistakes that I have made that my current coworkers are, of course, they are still supporting. So that's also why thinking about people and how they are going to like the code that I'm writing is so critical.
So there's some self-discipline in this process.
Of course, yeah. I think it comes with experience. I mean, as I showed you, I rewrote code that I didn't understand for many years. It wasn't just that one time. I did it a lot.
Because the place where I work, we have this awesome team lead, and for some reason, it always happens that the abstraction that he did are amazing and they're correct. And there's this bias because he's the team lead and he's usually right because he has a lot of experience. And sometimes, at least for me, it's really difficult to judge because he's searching for our feedback, but because we're not so experienced, what we do is like, I don't know, I'm not sure. And then he starts talking about the abstraction, why we have to do it, why we're doing it. And then, yeah, you're right, we have to go with this. And I don't know at what position you are, but if you're a little bit higher than the other people, this is really difficult to kind of judge your own work and to understand, is it correct or not? So there should be always someone which is telling you. And here's my other question. Are you doing a lot of
really strict code reviews? Like, do we have a rule for every PR should be checked by like 10 people and something like this to actually enforce this judgment to be correct of the abstraction?
Yeah, so I think as much as you can, the most important thing to do is find out how you can automate these kind of checks, such as the forbidden dependency test, or as much as you can put into CI, for two reasons. One, it removes the human judgment aspect, so if the CI is judging you, you can't argue with it. And of course, the other part is just that people make mistakes, right? And maybe it can be really hard in code review to figure out what abstraction it is that somebody is using. You understand it best when you're actually working with it. So what I find the most helpful is to think, okay, what is it that we can enforce and automate? And if the other things are mostly stylistic, then don't be stressed about that kind of stuff. But when it comes to things like new abstractions and things that will affect more and more people, that's why I think it's a great idea to move this, for example, out of the product code and into a separate library where at the very least those APIs are defined and it changes at a different pace. So it's not as likely that you're going to, like haphazardly push something to your library and publish it, hopefully. You have actually separated the quickly changing code from the more slow and stable changing code.
I really like that automation from CI. Like this dependency graph is something which would land in our repo next week. Definitely, like this shouldn't be imported anywhere, and it should be imported. Are there any like cool things like that you have seen the CI do, and the things you do in the CI where you haven't seen them much in other places?
I mean, that's a good question. I think this one is the thing that is most people are surprised by. One interesting application for this technique, which we haven't implemented yet, but is something we're looking into, is actually finding out how you can eliminate not only certain types of dependencies, but also understanding what those kinds are. So is it logic? Is it the router? Is it UI components? Because oftentimes you end up where the initial load of the application is so huge because everything gets kind of pulled into this base bundle by Webpack. And so this is also an interesting application of this tool, is that you can say, I don't want to actually have any kind of user interface here, or I can explicitly make sure that those things aren't getting pulled in. So that's one example. Yeah.
That's cool. And do you make it do you split the boundary between an external libraries, like things you don't control in general, and your own internal libraries, and the application domain-specific modules? Do you have like, how do you model that? Like, what kind of boundaries do you put on that?
Well, I think when it comes to some specific third-party libraries that we are using, it's not so different than what you mentioned in your talk, that you have to make a decision, is it the right time for me to abstract away some of this API? And sometimes it's not. So for example, with the API layer that we have, which fetches data and deals with things like deduplicating requests, caching, and all of these kind of things, this is implemented using a library, but it's implemented in a way that if you remove the library, actually almost nothing would change. So I think it's about wondering which of these dependencies is the most volatile, which ones are realistic to replace, which ones are we just buying into and we accept that, and which one of them do we want to make sure if we upgrade something here that it won't affect multiple teams at the same time.
Are there any questions from you guys? Anyone? Okay, my last one.
Okay.
You're thinking that we are finished, right?
Kind of, yeah.
Some rough metrics. How often you spend time architecting something, like in a meeting? Like, for example, every sprint, once a sprint, every month, or something like this?
That's a good question. I mean, for myself personally, I don't really do this. I'm not at the moment participating in a team that works in sprints, or I'm not writing product code. But I think it takes some kind of planning at the beginning when it comes to taking the lessons that you have learned and applying them. But if you can come up with an architecture that is also kind of horizontally going to handle more and more, I don't think that you have to revisit it all the time if you see that it's still working. So you have to kind of understand what are the limits. And one very helpful concept that forbidden dependency test is kind of a subset of is called fitness functions. Maybe you have heard about these. Basically, it's more and more ways that you can automate checking what is the health status of my architecture. This can be things like monitoring the build time or monitoring I don't know, the number of dependencies or anything like this. You can monitor these metrics and say, I consider the health of my application to be a function of all of these different metrics, and you can monitor how they occur over time. So if your build starts to get too slow, you actually have been tracking that the entire way.
That's really nice advice, thanks. Yeah, I think.
Thank you.
For the people which are listening and they missed the conference, I would just ask everyone to just introduce really quick to say hey and what.
Okay, I was the last guy to speak, so I'm going to be the first to introduce myself. I'm Martin Chaov. I'm working in a sports betting platform company, which is called SBTech. We're doing amazing stuff. I am responsible for the front-end application and everything that goes with it, including technology stack, bugs, protection incidents, stuff like that. It's kind of a fun job to do, very challenging, I love it.
Hey, I'm Elizabet Oliveira, and I'm a senior UX designer working for a company based in Dublin called Optum. And I also run my own startup called Soundtractor. It's based in Copenhagen, and I'm currently moving to Lisbon. And I like to be in between design and development. I used to be a front-end developer in the past, and right now I basically do design and my own open source project.
So, my name is David Kopal. I work at Blueberry, which is a digital agency based in Prague. I work as a software engineer and I like ReasonML.
All right, my name's Monica. I'm working at a fintech company with engineering hubs in Sofia, Berlin, and Sao Paulo. And there I'm leading a team of something like 15 or so front-end engineers. And that's all I've got for now.
Hi, I'm Mishu. I was the first to speak. I work at Skyscanner. I'm a senior senior full stack engineer or something. It's been a long day. So, yeah.
Hi, my name is Ilona. I'm a test engineer at a Central Startup in Berlin, and today my talk was about conversational sign-up with chatbot like experience with React and Redux.
Hello, I'm Slobodan Stojanović and I'm CTO of Cloud Horizon and Vacation Tracker. I'm mostly working with serverless and JavaScript. I'm often talking about that.
Hi, I'm Radо Stankov. I'm head of engineering at Product Hunt and co-organizer of ReactNotAConf. How are you? And a very often guest at the podcast.
I want to thank all the people in the audience who stayed till the end. You're great.
Actually, Radо is something like a co-host of this podcast. So, because this is a React conference, I want to start with the question, how you guys think we should teach React to people? Like, what's the first thing, for example, that we should start with? Is it the syntax? Is it how, I don't know, how you manage state? Yeah, what are your thoughts on this question?
I think people should start learning declarative programming first and state machines, because React has basically no interface to be learned. It has 5 methods when you're using the Quas syntax, and it has 2 or 3 functions that you can import, or 2-3 hooks. Like basically, there is no API to be learned. It's so simple. It's amazing. I love this. But when developers, at least from what I see from my experience, is that when developers first are hit with React, they're so deep into their imperative way of thinking that they try to do these complicated Quas taxonomies that inherit each other, this is just not the way to do React properly. So this is why I think the qualitative programming style, more functional way, it's going to make it for much easier learning curve for React.
So I kind of teach React in my spare time at the university. So what I've noticed is that people tend to learn best when there's a mix of some practice and some kind of general advice about like principles and patterns and how you should think about thinking and how should you think about structuring things. So that's kind of my like incremental learning would be kind of the best for anything almost.
For me, and maybe because I'm more of a designer, I think on React as to create components. So first thing, at least when I started learning, was how to create a component and other components, and then put like the children components and the main component and pass states, and then the children component receive the props. And I think it's a good way to understand how React works and how can communicate without any library. And after that, you can start thinking about using state libraries or other libraries.
Okay, I will talk about from a different angle because I know many people are learning React. They are, for example, starting with like programming. For example, as myself, I don't have a computer science degree, so when I start learning JavaScript, I think many people just go to React, but they don't learn the JavaScript basics, and I think it's a kind of issue because if you don't understand how a class works, if you don't understand what's like mutability, why it is good, why it is bad, it's kind of difficult to get into React because you just learn some patterns which you automate, but you actually don't understand like what's under the hood of the JavaScript class. There's like new keyword, how does it work? It's really important for people to understand the basics, and then it's much easier to understand what's going on in React when you are getting more advanced.
So you mean that you first have to learn, for example, what's class in JavaScript?
Prototype in
Okay,
JavaScript.
yeah.
For me, it helped me much when I learned like really this core concept and then moved to JavaScript, because for me, I don't have like computer science degree and background, and I think many people coming to like programming don't have this background, so I think people don't understand the need to like learn it. But yeah, there are two like people. Someone say learn React, then learn JavaScript basics. But I think it should be the other way around, to learn basics. Even they are boring, they are. But for some people, if you want to build user interfaces and you are dealing with prototype, it might be boring for you. I'm just my
for me, it's really difficult to judge your comment, because I actually started. This was JavaScript for me back in the days. There was no any framework at all. Even I actually started running ECMAScript from another totally different platform, which was the Flash environment. I do see a value in knowing, for example, what's prototyping, how JavaScript works beneath. Do you have any?
Okay, in my opinion, React is a tool that solves our problem, not really a thing that we a priori need to teach people to do, or JavaScript or anything else, serverless. So first, I think people need to understand the problem that they're solving, and then after that, pretty sure that learning React will not be the biggest bottleneck, because there are a lot of material, tutorials, and things like that. So I don't think that's the biggest bottleneck that we have, like teaching people React.
So we have to basically teach them first, for example, the really basic stuff, like JavaScript, for example.
Are we getting to math? I just asked.
No,
you could actually. No, because. Okay,
so we started with how do we teach React, then we moved to, okay, let's teach them programming. So now I'm just wondering what other basics they're going to learn before that. So are we going to start with math now? And before that, the English language. I mean, at a certain point, we need to identify where we're going to start doing damage, right? So how much knowledge you actually need to be able to make money? Let's start from this point of view, okay? Do I need to know what is prime number and how it's computed and how cryptocurrency works? No, right? If I can make money with it, no. But if I'm going to be a UI developer, for example, with React, can I write components without understanding any JavaScript? That's the actual question, right? Can I make money without actually learning what I don't need to learn? So if the answer is yes, so there is probably a React pattern we can teach them. Let's say in my company I have the pattern X. You learn to put the square box into the square hole. You do this from 5 till 9, and you're getting paid, and that's enough for starting, right? So I think in learning there is a time that your mind needs to rest. And when we're starting with, and even what I said about decorative programming and stuff, when I'm saying we need to teach them decorative programming, I assume that they know imperative programming first, okay? When I say they're starting to build taxonomy, so I expect them that they know OOP and they actually know good OOP. So I'm already trying to change their mind in a different paradigm. But again, it's not really needed. They need to be able to put up 2 by 2 equals 4, and it's fine. And this is a good starting point, I think.
Is it React actually bridging the gap between the developers and the designers? And can you come with an example where actually this happened? I'll give you an example with my company. We actually developed a design system, which I think most people end up with when they use React. But now our designer is not just experimenting with the UI. He has like a bunch of components, and he's just dropping components here and there. He's not really allowed to just come up with something new, and it's really nice, it looks really shiny and stuff. So yeah, do you have design systems? Is this helping to the communication between your developers and designers?
Yeah, so at my company we have a design system which we developed in collaboration with our designers. And one of the really cool things I've noticed about this is that it becomes really the source of truth also for the design team. So they know that they have sketch files, but maybe we haven't implemented all the features of those components in their mind. Maybe we have implemented part that's what we needed today. So they can refer to things like our storybook and actually see what's already there and be able to provide designs that really accurately reflect what people are going to experience in the web. So when I found out that our designers also look inside the storybook and even make pull requests to update colors, you know, these kind of things, it really felt like we're finally speaking the same language because we're working on something that the user is really going to experience.
I remember back when React was first introduced, a lot of people got that backlash of, oh, we're putting the HTML back in JavaScript, that's so PHP of you. And like, you know, there was this kind of, a little bit of a backlash to that. And then suddenly people started realizing that it's not separation of technologies, it should be separation of concerns, and encapsulation of components is a nice thing. And actually I think that kind of helps bridge the gap, because the encapsulation of that component, the atomic design principles, I think most of us know what that is, kind of help bridge that gap. And yeah, and we also have a in-house design system, and it's been like a blessing for any new kind of feature that you want to build. You can just prototype it, it looks amazing out of the box, and it's very easy to also upgrade when you have a nice feature, and the designer can just say, oh, we need to change that about the entire site, and it's done. It's, you know, like a snap.
50% of this death.
I was joking for the Thanos snap, so 50% of the design is broken after the designers touch the components.
Actually, that's my my next question. What do you do to support this process? For example, we pay extreme. We're really extreme in the code reviews, for example, when we're touching some of these components. And we make sure that we update the style guide, for example, so the designers, when they check it next time, they see, this has changed a little bit. I for sure know that there are some efforts from the developer's point of view. So yeah, how's this working with you?
This is a super difficult question, I think, because at the same time, when you create a design system, everything is consistent, but it's also easy to introduce that single point of failure. Because if you make a bug in your components and you roll it out, and you don't have the proper tests on the UI layer on the application level, maybe you are really missing the way it's truly being used. So I think there's no real way to get around this besides having tests on the library level and also making sure you are writing the right kind of tests in your application code as well. So finding a way that you actually roll out these libraries in a way that is kind of safe and realizing the impact that such a mistake could bring.
Well, it's also about like the responsibility of adoption. So there's the team that rolls out the component library and they test their stuff and they're trying to be as vigorous as they can about it. But there's also, whenever I'm importing the new version of the component, it's on me to actually make sure that it works the way I expect it to work. So it's both sides of that equation, being vigilant and vigorous about, is the thing that I'm doing correct and is it behaving in the way that I want it to behave?
Just a last note on this one. Any tools about that? In terms of, for example, I don't want to say stout components, but yeah, I have to say. So, because stout components is a library which basically kind of makes this possible to design components which are coming with the CSS and everything. And there's a lot of tooling around that components, like generate a whole style guide just by having the component. So yeah, do you use any tools about that? Let's phrase it this way. Do you use any tools about managing your CSS in JavaScript externally?
We are using Storybook, for example, and all of our styles. We're using class is actually in another project, so it's not technically together with the components because we are injecting it on the page and because we have actually an entire unit changing the CSS and doing customizations of our platform. And this is, for us, for example, start components that doesn't really work. We've investigated it many times and tried to make it work because it's super cool, like less files, you know. I like having less files, but eventually for us it didn't work.
What we use something called Style Guides because it actually worked better than Playbook in order to integrate with our Webpack because Playbook couldn't basically integrate with what we had. And the nice thing about it is you just write a markdown file with some JavaScript and you actually have it automatically pulls all the documentation for you. And we use a lot of CSS modules where we are basically composing smaller utility classes and we have basic core styling components. We call them style components before the style components library existed and took the name.
The style guides, and what I like is for each component you have a markdown file and automatically it creates your documentation and you just have your components folder as well, and it's very good if you want to create an isolated component outside of your product, so that's a good solution.
So I know that it was a long day, and I kind of want to wrap up this episode with one last question. And something which I'm trying to do with the podcast is to make it not so technical, because I know that there are a lot of podcasts on this topic. There are a lot of articles and stuff where you could actually go and read about this stuff. What I'm trying to do is to ask my guests about maybe their experiences within our industry. And because we're at the conference, my last question will be what it means to be a speaker at the conference. And this would be nice if you all just take the mic and just briefly say what you do and how this all going, without going into like 20 minutes talk about it. So for example, what I do is like if I have an idea about the presentation, I make the presentation at home. I actually do make, I go through the whole presentation a couple of times at home, and not just while looking at the slides. I'm actually making the presentation at home alone. Then maybe trying and making it at a meetup before the actual event. And then actually most of the people going to conferences without speaking there, they don't know that these people actually, sometimes they have to take a day off. They have to travel, which when you are young and immortal and you have no kids, it sounds really awesome, like traveling and just meeting cool people. But sometimes it's tough, especially if your job is to speak a lot. It means traveling a lot. It means being 100% always with a smile on the face and everything. So yeah, how is about you speaking?
For some reason I'm starting again. It's becoming a habit. Okay, when I do presentations, I like to show code, working code. I don't like showing only pictures. And I'm actually doing live coding sessions from time to time, which is a lot of fun because usually nothing works. But that's my fault usually, not the language or something else. But I can give you an example for this talk. I'm doing this one for the very first time, and it's not fully polished yet. But the source code took me actually days of work to actually document, to actually create all the pictures, to develop it in a simple way, because with this source code I want to communicate an idea. I don't want to force people to use implementation, but I want to show how powerful a specific implementation could be. And it was really tough to make it with an example which is going to be close to everybody. I think a carousel is it's better than a to-do list, right? No? I still think carousel is better than a to-do list to show off such a feature. But again, it's even more than a day. If you want to show working code, if you want to share a bigger idea, it's definitely more than a day, and it's not like 5 minutes here, 5 minutes there. It actually requires focus, because I don't know the audience, right? There might be geniuses there and they could understand me with 2 sentences, or there might be people who want to start with development who won't understand anything. So when you're curating your content for tabula rasa, a known group, it's really pretty tough. And this is where I have the hardest time, usually.
So for me, when I do my talks and when I create my slides, I try to create at least in a creative way, also in a way that it will make people follow their own ideas and realize that you don't need to be like an expert, good developer to achieve whatever you want to do. And I try to show okay, you can be a designer and you can use React and create your own things. You can be a musician and build your own things. So that's what I try to achieve with my talks, so people can create whatever they want. It's just you just need passion, I think.
Just to be sure, the question is why we are speaking to conferences, right?
So it was more about how you are actually doing it. Well, like, do you spend time working on the presentation a lot at home or something?
Okay, I'm kind of perfectionist, so I spend a lot of time preparing my talk. I'm rehearsing a lot because that's one kind of book which really helped me to prepare for my talks is from the now owner of TED Talks. I can't remember his name, but it was a really great book, and he's basically saying that all of these TED speakers, they are basically write their talk, and then they are rehearsing it till they know it in a way that they can put emotions in it. I mean, you know that when you are learning your talk at the beginning, it's just you're speaking like a robot because you are thinking to really get all the concepts you need to cover, and later you are basically put emotions in it. So that's my strategy. I always present stages. First, you just learn somehow, not exactly the words, but the idea of your talk, and then I'm ready to give a talk when I can put emotions in it, when I can do some, I don't know, body language with it, when I can, I mean, that's my preparation for talks.
Okay, so my preparation is very, very long, I would say. So this talk I gave today, I started writing it in December. And I probably practiced it more than 40 times, either giving it at a meetup or having done it in front of or using my boyfriend as a slave to listen to my talk and give me feedback. So the more times that you give it, I think the more confident that I become, and also the better that it gets, because when I first give it, there's nothing funny about it. And if I try to make jokes at the beginning, they're really bad. So they kind of have to come up organically the more times you do that, and then it becomes kind of decorated with a little bit of humor. And I also have to take off vacation days from work because it requires more than just doing it on a couple of weekends. So it is, yeah, like a side gig, I guess, just to get it out.
Well, for me, it's impossible to do a talk if I don't have, like, I need to start with some, like, an angle, like, what am I trying to say? There needs to be kind of a thread, a story, or an idea that I want to kind of follow through and have that kind of thing that I'm returning to, like, beat by beat. And the preparation and the delivery part is, yeah, it requires a lot of energy. It's pretty nice. When I graduated computer science and theater, and people were asking, well, why are you doing that? And this is kind of why. And I enjoy that kind of experience I had from student theater. And but the best thing for me about speaking at conferences is that I get to meet all these great people that have great perspectives. I always feel like my talk is the weakest one, that all the people put so much effort in preparation and they're so passionate, and the audience is great, and the energy, and when people come after the talk and start discussing things with you, and you build like instant friendships and instant connections, and it's just an amazing experience to be able to do this. So thank you a lot, guys.
Giving a talk at meetups is a really nice approach to get insights from the public and understand the people, and understand what is wrong, what is went wrong, what is good. And for me, what is really work is I always share my talks, talk I have done too, with my mentors. And actually, I'm always seeking for some constructive feedback for them, and I'm very thankful for that.
So for my presentations, I borrowed the concept from a great book called Training from the Back of the Room. She explained the perfect training, 4 C's concept. So everything starts with connections, then there's then after connections there's concepts, then after that concrete practice, and in the end you have conclusion. So I start with that and with the storyline, and somehow end up with presentation. I should probably
rehearse my presentations more. But after few like rehearsals and everything, I start to hate the story. So that's a big challenge. But yeah, my main motivation is meeting people and learning more, because whenever I prepare a new presentation, I learn so many things.
Okay, yeah. So actually, I gave my first talk here, and I do it very mechanical. Like I spend a lot of time like learning the mechanics of how to do a presentation, so I can actually build the slides quite quickly. And a lot of people write or draw to make dots. I actually use slides. Like sometimes when I'm like prototyping an idea, I just open Keynote and start dragging stuff and like playing, okay, if I have to present this idea, how is this going to work? And usually what I do for my presentations is I have a lot of like pieces. Like I want something to tell. Like I have a story, I have code around it, and then I build like a narrative, like exactly like Slobodan said, like three parts of the whole thing. And I stopped rehearsing like 2 or 3 years ago because I started to get bored in my own presentations. Like I was giving once a talk where I had all the jokes, everything landed, everything was great, but I know what's coming and it wasn't fun for me because I know what I was going to say next. And at some point it wasn't very fun. So I stopped rehearsing my presentations and I like just give them 2 or 3 times. And when I start knowing everything, I just stop giving the talk.
Awesome. Yeah, so this is exactly the message which I want to send with this episode. Speaking at the conference is hard as hell, I think. It requires a lot of work, preparation. If you're at the end of the conference, you have to spend the whole day just wondering how it's going to be, and it's stressful and stuff. But at the same time, it's really awesome for the reasons which they mentioned. So I know that there are a bunch of events here happening in Sofia. Rado is organizing the React meetup. So talk with him, go try speaking there, it will be awesome, I guess. And I want to thank you all for staying so late, spending the day here. I want to thank to the organizers, to the speakers. Yeah, it was awesome being here.